studio, where today I will be showing you how to make the cookies and cream dress. This dress has a square neckline both in the front and the back. It has thick straps and an A-line skirt that comes down just below your knees. It has a hidden zipper closure on the side and is made up of panels where you can choose to add top stitching, like I did on this version. You can see the top stitching runs along the neckline, the armholes, and all of the seams of the dress to make it a bit more visually interesting. The dress is unlined and is finished with the bias tape. You can find the link to this pattern and my Etsy shop in the description below. And you can find all of the notions, fabric you'll need there as well. You can see what a difference it makes, what fabric you choose. This one is a cotton linen blend, and the one I'm wearing is a brocade. In this tutorial, I'll show you how to do the whole dress and also how to add top stitching if you wish to do so. Let's get into it.
Place one front middle piece on top of the front center piece with right sides facing. Match the notches at the waist and pin. Sew the pieces together. Finish the seam allowance with a zigzag stitch or an overlocker. Repeat on the other side. Press the seams towards the center front. Once you have sewn together the front center and the front middle pieces and pressed the seams towards the center, grab your front side pieces. Place one front side piece on top of the front middle piece with right sides facing and match the notches. Pin in place and sew. Be careful when sewing the curved part so there is no bunching. Trim the seam allowance to around 7 mm. Repeat on the other front side piece. Finish the seam allowances and press towards the sides. You have pressed these seams towards the center. Now press these seams to the side. Put the front pieces aside. Place one back side piece on the back center piece, right sides facing, and match the notches. Pin in place and sew. When you're pinning, don't worry about the center piece being longer than the side piece. Sew it in place with a 1.5 cm seam allowance. See how this piece overhangs a little bit, but when you're sewing it with a 1.5 cm seam allowance, it will make these match up. finish sewing, these two will match up. When you press the seam towards the side, it will be hidden. Finish the seam allowance with a zigzag stitch or an overlocker and repeat on the other side. Press the seams towards the sides. Place the two back center pieces together with right sides facing. Match the notches and pin in place. Sew together. Finish the seam allowances and press towards one side. If you like, you can also press this seam open, depends on your preference. Place the front bodice on top of the back bodice with right sides facing, matching the straps. Pin in place and sew. Finish the seam allowance and press towards the back bodice. With right sides together, pin only the right hand side seam of the dress. Stitch and press the seams open. You can tell that this is the front because this seam has a curve. The two pieces are lying with right sides facing. You've attached them at the shoulder and now pin this close. Sew this seam closed. Press the seam open. From the top of the armhole on both the front and the back of the dress, measure 5.5 centimeters and make a mark. You can do this with a pen or a pin. This is where the zipper will start. Turn the zipper to the wrong side. Using tailor's chalk, make a mark on the zipper 50 centimeters from the top. This is where you will stop sewing. Open the zipper fully and place one edge of the zipper over the edge of the front of the dress with right sides facing. Make sure that the top of the zipper teeth match up with the line you made 5.5 centimeters in. Pin in place and baste. Stop when you hit the mark you made on the zipper. Make sure the teeth of the zipper are lined up with the seam allowance, which is 1.5 centimeters. Turn the right-hand side of the zipper twice and place it on the other side of the dress with right sides together. Baste in place. Attach the concealed zipper foot and sew the zipper in place. Turn the dress to the right side, close the zipper and press to neaten the seam. Turn the dress to the wrong side and pin the side seam of the dress from the mark you made down to the bottom of the dress. Stitch. Also, pin the side seam above the zipper closed as well, stitch and press the seams open. If you're not adding top stitching, skip the following steps. Switch to a top stitching thread in the needle, but leave the bobbin with the standard thread. You will be sewing on the right side of the fabric. Increase the stitch length. For example, if your stitch length was 2, increase to 3 or 4 for the top stitching. On the front of the dress, start with the seams connecting the front center and the front middle. Sew on the right side of the seam, where you pressed the seam earlier, about 3 mm away from the seam. When you're top stitching, make sure you're top stitching on the side where you pressed the seam towards. Start sewing 1 cm lower than the edge of the fabric. Instead of backstitching to anchor the thread, leave the thread tails at the start. Sew to the bottom of the dress, but do not backstitch. Top stitching thread through to the back and tie a knot, both at the beginning and at the end. Top and stitch another line, 3 mm away from the first one, still on the right side of the seam, and repeat pulling through the threads and tying them. Repeat on the other front center and front middle seam, this time sewing on the left side of the seam. Then repeat on the seam of the front middle and front side, this time working on the front side pattern pieces, where you have pressed the seam before. Repeat on the back of the dress. Start on the seam between the back center and the back side pieces. Sew on the back side pattern pieces where you have pressed the seam before. On the center back, sew 1 line to the left, 3 mm away from the seam, and 1 line to the right, 3 mm away from the seam. You can see there's stitching on the 2 sides of the seam. Starting at the center of the back dress, sew a line of basting stitches 1.5 cm away from the edge of the neckline. Open up one side of the bias tape and place it along the basted line on the right side of the fabric. Pin the bias tape with the open fold along the line. Make sure to leave some extra bias tape when you start and when you get to the end. When you get close to the starting point, stop pinning and fold in the extra bit of bias tape at the start, and then overlap the end and fold in as well. Cut off the excess. Unfold the bias tape where you're going to start sewing, start stitching, and go all the way around. When you get to the starting point, stop sewing and fold in the extra bit of bias tape at the start and fold over the end of the bias tape as well. Continue sewing until you have sewn over the folded end. Backstitch and break the thread. Trim the seam allowance to about 5 mm. Make sure you're only cutting the fabric and not the bias tape. You can make small snips along the curved edges to help you when turning the bias tape. Make sure not to cut into the seam allowance. Turn the bias tape to the inside. So first, fold it like this and fold it in to the inside. Pin it in place. Stitch close to the edge of the bias tape. Starting at the side seams, sew a line of basting stitches 1.5 cm away from the edge of the armhole. Open up one side of the bias tape and place it along the basted line on the right side of the fabric. Pin the bias tape with the open fold along the line. Make sure to leave some extra bias tape when you start. When you get close to the starting point, stop pinning and fold in the extra bit of bias tape at the start and the end. Start sewing at the side seam, go all the way around. Continue sewing until you have sewn over the folded end. Cut the bias tape. Trim the seam allowance to around 5 mm. Repeat what you've done on the neckline. Fold the bias tape in so that it lays flat on the inside. Pin it in place and sew. You can make small snips along the edge to make it easier to turn the bias tape to inside, but make sure you're not cutting into the stitch line. Starting at the underarm seam, stitch close to the edge of the bias tape. Of the dress with my overlocker because the fabric was unraveling a little bit, but you don't have to do this. Fold in the bottom edge of the skirt by 5 millimeters and press, and then fold it in once again by 3 centimeters. Like so. Pin it in place and stitch. If you're not top stitching, then you are finished with your dress. Once you've pinned the hem in place, sew close to the edge of the fold. Stitch 2 lines of top stitching around both armholes. Start at the armhole close to the edge and stitch all the way around. Stop sewing when you get back to the beginning. Sew a second line 3 mm away from the first line. Follow the earlier steps on how to start and finish top stitching. Repeat on the other side. You can also choose to sew the line of top stitching on top of the stitch line where you've stitched the bias tape in place, and then you'll hide that. If you do that, sew a line on top of that earlier stitching and then stitch another one next to it. Stitch 2 lines of top stitching around the neckline as well, following the same steps as on the armholes. Then, at the hem, working on the right side of the skirt, measure 3 cm and sew the first line of top stitching. Then, sew another line of top stitching 3 mm below that. Before you get to the end of where you started the top stitch, you can pull through the yarn, you can pull through the thread and tie the knot so that you don't have to do it after.
I hope this tutorial was helpful. Let me know down in the comments below. And again, you can find the link to my shop in the description below, along with the link to this pattern. I hope to see you next time.